Hi everyone. Today I'm going to be talking about peer review and feedback. I'm going to be speaking on this in terms of our peer review in class, but also in terms of feedback that you might receive in a broader, more general professional environment. So for us, and I think this is good advice for any situation in which you're asked to provide feedback, there's really three steps. You want to first describe. You want to second, evaluate, and third, suggest. And all of these steps are incredibly important. You don't want to miss any of these. You also don't want to do these out of order necessarily. It's important to be able to describe first what's happening, to see what is being done that is in accordance with the assignment. And the second is to identify what can be changed. So first, before we can ever say that something needs to be changed, we need to first at least have a basic understanding of what has been done in accordance with the assignment. And the last step is to suggest. So anytime we make an evaluation, what needs to be changed, we should also follow that up with a suggestion. In all cases, we want to be constructive in our reviews. And I give you guys this benefit whenever I'm grading. You notice that I give an evaluation, and in my suggestions, in my feedback, I always describe and I always suggest. And this is what we call constructive criticism. Your goal in a review, whether it's for school or for work, is to create a better document or product. It's not to cut someone down. So feedback should always be helpful. It should always be helpful more than it is critical. It can still be critical, but it needs to follow that criticism up with something that's constructive. Something specific and tangible, not just, make things flow better, but where can this person address issues of organization? How can this person address issues of organization? So right now I'm going to go over some questions that you probably want to ask yourself as you're writing, but also ask of the document that you're reviewing. I'm breaking this down into content, organization, readability and style, and then the last, design. So I'm going to go through this real quick. So content, this is the who, what, where, when, why, and how of the assignment or the document. So essentially you're deciding whether, according to the assignment, the contents of the document, they line up. Have they included the content that corresponds to the given situation, whether that's a writing assignment or a communication situation? Have they left anything out that's necessary for understanding? Have they gone beyond the limits of the assignment? In what ways have they gone beyond the limits of the assignment? Sometimes that can be a good thing, sometimes it can be a bad thing. And then can you verify their statistics or references? Can you go out and seek a third party or independent source, other research that's saying the same things? And this, even though it's in a lot of ways about the argument that a person is making, this is also, this is the content, this is the meat of the document, the evidence that we use. So next, I want to talk about organization. This is the relationship that the parts of the document have to the whole. If there is a direct structure that you can see, can you describe what that looks like? If there's something indirect happening, can you try to figure out what's happening in terms of how this person is organizing their ideas? What is the document's central organizing principle? And so I call back to the research and drafting presentation where I talked about some of those principles. Can you identify one of those that's happening here? How does the document transition throughout the whole document, not only through different stages of the information, but also from sentence to sentence? Evaluating style and readability. Even though style is about word choice and grammar, it's important to note that it's also created through content and organization. There's a kind of formal style that comes with a formal organization. So some things specific to style and readability are the tone. Is the tone appropriate for the situation or assignment? Is it coherent, both structurally, so thinking about larger order organization of the document, and grammatically, again, sentence level? Is it readable, and is it enjoyable to read? That is actually a criteria in my rubric for you guys. Is it enjoyable to read? And that doesn't mean that, I'm laughing my way through this, but do I take joy from just reading it? In other words, is it not boring and awful of an experience? Are you creating an experience for your reader? Are names, spellings, and punctuation correct? Especially with names. If you're naming professionals, you want to make sure those names are correct and spelled correctly. Are sentence lengths varied? So not too long, also not too short, and not repetitively long or short. Oftentimes you'll have very short sentences in a row and this becomes monotonous. Really long sentences all in a row become really difficult to manage. So be thinking about that. Are there any vague, cliched, or even offensive pieces of language in the document? And do you catch any mistakes if you read the document aloud? A lot of these things can be caught or can be kind of addressed if a document is simply read aloud. Oftentimes when we receive a document, even though we're using our eyes to kind of look at it, we're also reading it internally. And so to kind of externalize that process and read it aloud, you're mimicking what your audience is actually going to be doing with your document. And finally, design. So design principles, CRAP principles, contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity. Do you see these things at play here? How are they working? Does it conform to industry and or genre expectations? If it's an executive summary, does it conform to those like design-wise? Does it use an effective typeface? So not always Times New Roman, but if it uses something differently, is that an effective one? Does it not distract from the actual content? Do paragraphs look readable? We've all seen those paragraphs that are huge chunks, and those aren't manageable for a reader. So do they seem like they're manageable for a reader? And then does the document have some kind of visual variety? And this plays into the CRAP design principles where there's contrast as well as repetition. So you're creating, again, you're creating an experience through the design of the document. Really, a lot of these can come down to, is it professional? If you can ask yourself, is it professional? And the answer is yes. You're likely meeting those expectations. So now I want to move to kind of more professional environments. Even though those feedback and review principles are important in professional environments, there are specific standards for feedback in professional environments. So you can have indirect feedback, but you can also have direct feedback, and we're probably more familiar with direct feedback. This would be, a performance review. It can also be nonverbal. So if you're, presenting in front of someone and you immediately see that their body language is off, that's a direct feedback. If they flinch or if they yawn, this is direct feedback. Indirect is responses from people who aren't your audience. Direct is from the receiver of the message. Indirect is not from the receiver of the message. So this might be through the grapevine. This could also be like if you're looking at SEO or data analytics for a website. You can see that you can see kind of the data shows a kind of feedback, even though it's not a specific kind of feedback, it's a kind of broad pattern feedback. Feedback also comes internally versus externally. Feedback honestly always starts with you. You're always, before sending out a document in any way, shape, or form, you yourself need to check on your judgment of the correctness, the clarity, the conciseness, and the ethics of the document that you're sending out. But of course, you also get external. These can come from your boss, response rates, user-generated feedback, surveys, field research. So Feedback from research in specific. This is something called consumer research. Many of you have probably worked with this in your majors already, but you can have qualitative consumer research and quantitative consumer research. Qualitative is describing the how and the why of a pattern. So it's trying to figure out why something happens or why a group of people respond a certain way. A quantitative feedback from research is going to be the what. So these are the patterns, describing the patterns, how many often, some methods that you might see in each of these. Qualitative are usually interviews or focus groups. Quantitative is usually Likert scales or multiple choice questions. Qualitative, it is describing what it's like, the quality of something, how it feels. It's a subjective, human-centered response. Quantitative is going to be how many, what patterns. It's an objective, observable response. And of course, with all of this, feedback needs to come with a grain of salt. People are biased at times. Sometimes people are not even reliable sources of information. And so to get feedback from them isn't always helpful for your purpose. So I say here, even informal feedback from colleagues needs to be both valid and reliable, but it isn't always the case. They can Reviews can be given based on a reviewer's bias towards you or your topic. You may have had even a teacher you've done good work for, but their response to your work is based on a personal bias. The reviewer may not be reliable as well. Again, they may not be an expert. They may not have the time. They may not even be interested or motivated to give you correct feedback. And I'm sure you've received this from fellow students in certain classes, that you get kind of meaningless feedback. And it's because their reliability isn't exactly there. Their motivation isn't there. In any situation where you're receiving feedback, make sure you approach it with a discerning eye. Understand that not all reviews are going to be helpful, and that there is a point in time in which you kind of have to stop listening to other people. It begins with you. That internal feedback begins with you. You move it externally, and then you kind of bring it back. You say, okay, I'm no longer going to listen to other people right now. I'm going to take in what I've heard and combine it with what I internally feel about this work. And that's really how feedback works. So thank you for listening. I think you guys will be using this information for your first peer review this week, so good luck with that.